Hi, everyone. I would like to welcome you all to our Introduction to Community Engaged Research webinar. This session is done in collaboration with and support from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, Academy Health, and Scholar Strategy Network. During the session, our goal is to provide tangible skills for developing a community engaged research project. In recent years, we have seen the need for this kind of research in light of inequitable and one-sided research relationships between academic researchers and historically marginalized communities. This has led to mistrust and exploitation from results and data not returning to community members for their use, to the community's best interests not being considered. We've seen how these partnerships can deteriorate and cause harm. That being said, many in this field, including researchers and funders, have acknowledged and recognized this issue and made tremendous progress to addressing those problems by working in collaboration with communities and not on them. As a result, community engaged research was born, and now community members are actively involved and sometimes even leading the research process from beginning to end. To ensure that this practice continues, many groups have created trainings, including this webinar, to share vital steps in starting a genuine community engaged research project. Our session today will help you understand the different types of community engaged research, how to begin this process in your own research program, identify potential challenges that will likely arise, and help you determine ways to balance this work with your own professional demands. Overall, we hope today can be the foundation from which you can build off of in developing your own community engaged research project. My name is Stephen Wu, and my pronouns are he and him. I am the Health Policy Associate at SSN, supporting and guiding our health equity scholars connect their research to policy stakeholders. I have a background in policy advocacy and community organizing, and I'm currently based in Houston, Texas. Joining me to go more in depth on topics today will be Dr. Stephanie Chambers, Dr. Veta Sanders-Thompson, and Logan Singerman. The Scholar Strategy Network is a federated nonprofit organization that brings together scholars, policy actors, and journalists with the goal of promoting the use of research and evidence to improve policy and strengthen democracy. Through our network of university-based scholars in 30 chapters across 26 states, SSN provides fit-for-purpose policy recommendations and guidance with direct impacts to our communities. So here's today's agenda. First, I will go through an introduction of the different types of community engaged research. Next, I will share ways to incorporate community engagement into your research question and planning. And then afterwards, we'll hear from our scholars and practitioners, share techniques in balancing professional demands and community engagements, practical steps to beginning a community engaged research project, and addressing common mistakes in community engaged research. Finally, we'll share some steps in advancing your project past the planning stage and provide some additional resources as you move forward. To begin, let's review what community engaged research is. In all too typical research process, scholars begin by asking a question, then design a project to answer it before extracting data and publishing findings in venues far afield from the community. In contrast, community engaged research seeks to make both the research process and the resulting findings mutually beneficial for both the researcher and the broader community. It accomplishes this by including community voices, perspectives, and decision-making at each stage of the process. According to the CDC, community engaged research is the process of working collaboratively with and through groups of people affiliated by geographic proximity, special interest, or similar situations to address issues affecting the well-being of those people. Cynthia George, writing for the Community Engagement Institute at VCU, adds that community engaged research identifies the assets of all stakeholders and incorporates them in the design and conduct of the different phases of the research process. Taken together, these descriptions demonstrate that a community engaged approach enables community participation while ensuring that research is culturally sensitive, relevant, responsive, equitable, and reciprocal. Just as you as a scholar provides expertise in research methods, theory, and design, communities provide expertise with key insights and lived experiences of the problem at hand and invaluable relationships with vital stakeholders. Now that we have an understanding of what community engaged research is, let's dive into the different ways it can manifest in your projects. It may be helpful to think of community engaged research as a spectrum of activities you can incorporate into your project. The University of California, San Francisco Clinical and Translational Science Institute community engaged program, noted that the spectrum for community engaged research lies in both the level of engagement and the different forms it can take at each of those different levels. On one end of the spectrum, participant recruitment can look like random phone sampling, posting flyers on the street or in newspapers, or ad hoc interactions between participants and research staff. As you can see, these methods are done at the discretion of the researcher with little to no community partner involvement. Moving towards the middle, a researcher might conduct their work through a convened focus group at the beginning of the project, identify key themes and issues, and at the end, report back final findings and conduct data analysis with the community. Another form could involve soliciting help from the community-based organization to help implement a study designed by the researcher. This could look like the organization serving as a subcontractor limited to specific tasks, maybe including providing education, following a research protocol, or providing space for the study to take place. Continuing along the spectrum, as you plan and execute your research program, may include setting up structures to make collaborative opportunities possible. This can include creating a community advisory board to help review proposals, provide input on research protocol and design, and be a bridge between researchers and the community, and develop dissemination plans to share findings. At this level, we see increased levels of engagement that more intentionally involve community members for their knowledge. And then lastly, we arrive at the higher end of the spectrum. Here, a researcher enters into a partnership with a community-based organization at the beginning of the research process to tackle a question or an issue that is mutually beneficial to all parties. Research questions, methods, and plans are created and designed together. Decision-making and sharing of resources are equitable between parties. At this point, you are conducting research with and not on the community, and your partner and members are subject matter experts here. The spectrum is a good way to see where your specific project might fit with community engagements, and we want to reinforce that starting at any of these levels is beneficial. As you progress with your career, we do hope that everyone moves towards the higher end of engagement. So we're going to spend a few minutes just looking at some of the different types of high engagements there are. So on the screen, we have some of the more popular forms, which include community academic partnerships, action research, participatory action research, and community-based participatory research. A lot of these terms are used quite interchangeably and have very similar approaches in working with a community partner during the research process. Due to these similar approaches, I'm going to focus a little bit more on just the most popular form, community-based participatory research, or CBPR. So CBPR is a collaborative research approach that is designed to ensure and establish structures for participation by communities affected by the issue being studied, representatives of organizations and researchers in all aspects of the research process to improve the well-being through action. Most notably, this form of research takes place in community settings and involves community members in the design and implementation of research projects, demonstrates respect for the contributions of success that are made by community partners, as well as respect for the principle of quote unquote doing no harm to the communities involved. One of the foundational ideals for CBPR is that the more you systematically involve members in groups, the more relevant and applicable research findings will be. It involves co-learning and reciprocal transfer of expertise by all research partners with a focus on the issues being studied. There's shared decision-making power, and there's mutual ownership of the research process and product. Now that we have some understanding of what community engaged research is and the different forms it can manifest in, let's dive into how you can incorporate community engagement at the start of your research project. In a report on key practices for community engagement in research by the Center for Addiction and Mental Health Community Advisory Committee for Research, they provided 10 key practices to integrate across the stages of a community-based research study. For this section, we're going to focus on the first 4 as part of the planning and partnership development phase. They incorporate defining and learning about the community to be researched prior to initiating a study, collaborating with community partners to ensure the involvement of diverse members of the community to be researched, integrating the community in developing or refining a research question, and developing a research agreement to guide a partnership with community representatives. One of the first questions to ask and answer before you even begin your research process is determining the community of interest. The concept of community can refer to many different things, including communities of a place or geographic region, think neighborhood, city, district, communities of identity and faith, think race, religion, gender identity, or communities with shared experiences, think individuals who might be incarcerated. Some ways to learn more about a potential community of interest includes meeting with leaders, attending community events and meetings, and asking for relevant resources to learn and understand pressing issues. A scholar can gain entry here through some of the following ways. Identify a colleague maybe who has worked or is currently working on a collaborative project with a community partner. They probably can give you some insights. Ask to be introduced to individual or groups that might be interested in partnering with you. Going through a warm tide that has an established relationship helps give credibility and increases the likelihood that a community member responds. And if your institution has a community engagement department or office, it would be helpful to contact them and see if they have any existing relationships with communities of interest. For this and all subsequent practices, it's important to recognize the value of relationship building. It might take some time to build trust between you and the community, but the more you genuinely engage with members and treat them as true partners for your research, the farther you will get. Some things to consider here include start by listening and acknowledging the experiences and perspectives of that community. Come with and apply an asset-focused approach, build on the strengths of the community versus the deficits, and have regular presence in the community. This helps with building trust that you become more of a reliable stakeholder invested in what they do. Once the community of interest is established, the next step would be to determine how to connect with partners. One method is to reach out to a community-based organization or agency that specifically serves the community of interest. These groups can include nonprofit organizations, government agencies, faith-based groups, or networks and coalitions. These organizations can serve many purposes, including being a safe third place for members to coalesce, advocate on behalf of their members' interests, and provide critical social and economic services. They can also be the bridge to determine interested members who want to be involved with the research project. Instead of you as an outsider engaging individually with organization members, the organization can directly communicate your wishes and plans with their members and internally decide who would be the best fit for the project and ensure that a diverse representation of perspectives and thoughts are included. Essentially, they can fill in gaps that you might have overlooked at this stage. Later in the session, Dr. Sanders Thompson will share a few examples from her career on when to reach out to community partners, give tips on what first contact looks like, and key aspects of building trust with your partner. The next step is involving the community in identifying or refining the research question. This step is critical as it establishes which questions, issues, and priorities the project will focus on. Thus, it's important to have the research question developed with community input at the get-go. This increases the likelihood that the final product is both meaningful and impactful for the community's use and benefits. Access Alliance Multicultural Health and Health Services has a helpful worksheet that walks through developing a research question, which we'll share in the description with community partners. Some questions that need to be answered could include, what do we know now? This is where you list out all potential research questions. What do we want to understand? Why do we want to understand this? What do we already know? Are there current literature or previous research on this topic? Does that existing research reflect reality? There could be a gap there. What is the relevance and urgency of this question to the community? What is the feasibility, including time, cost, and human resources for this project? And what is the potential policy change impact that we can get? Through this process, all parties benefit. You as a scholar can be exposed to new ideas, perspectives, and challenges from community knowledge. One example can include community members noting the need for interpretation services to fully communicate with everyone and reducing the barriers to information. On the flip side, community members can learn if their questions and priorities have already been addressed with previous research and current literature. If their ideas are even feasible to execute given the cost, timing, and resources needed. Now, some of you might have already established your question and would like to engage with the members now. In this scenario, there's still a great value in having those members offer their expertise and lived experience to review and help refine your research question. In this process, it's important to you as a scholar to both communicate the research for why the project is designed the way it is and be open to incorporating their recommendations. This can look like surveys or community feedback meetings. Again, at each stage of the process, building in time for listening and feedback is crucial. And that is especially true here. You'll want to take time to understand the community's priorities and interests and understand that they may not dovetail with your own academic interests. Logan Singerman from Southside Institution's Neighborhood Alliance, or SINA, later will share some examples of why you should go through these questions as early as possible to ensure that you and your partner are on the same page. The last portion of the planning phase is establishing a research agreement with your partner. This agreement helps guide the research project through all phases and clarifies expectations and needs of all parties. Similar to the previous steps, this agreement should be done in conjunction with your community partner's feedback and inputs. This can manifest in a memorandum of understanding, a subcontract, or other kinds of agreements. Many of you might have already thought about this or conducted similar work where informal verbal agreements were in place. We do want to encourage the use of a formal agreement written in accessible language with minimal legal terms. The real benefits of a formal agreement is to explicitly note both parties' expectations of the research process and of each other in relation to everyone's level of involvement. That way, everyone can point back to the document to understand if the project is progressing as expected, which will help both establish trust and accountability. So some things to consider includes roles and responsibilities, expectations for participating, compensation for people's time and energy, and then decision-making procedures for all parties. With an agreement in place, consider establishing regular check-ins with your partner to determine if the project is moving according to plan, raise and respond to issues, and revise your agreement if needed. It's important to build in flexibility with your agreement and not be too rigid with certain elements. As with any research project, you might hit some bumps in the road that require a reevaluation of the terms and a reassessment of next steps. By keeping it flexible, you'll also ensure that your partners will have a voice in decision-making of what those new plans look like. All right, now that we've gone through an introduction of community engaged research and discussed some key ways to incorporate the community early on, let's move on to our next couple of sections where we'll hear from scholars and practitioners give practical advice on how to start this research process, how to balance your professional demands and community engagement, and ways to address common mistakes along the way. Leading these sections will be Dr. Stephanie Chambers, Professor of Political Science and Department Chair at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. Her research and teachings focus on migration, urban politics, education policy, and racial and ethnic politics, gender and politics, and environmental justice. Joining Dr. Chambers will be Dr. Veta Sanders-Thompson, the E. Desmond Lee Professor of Racial and Ethnic Studies at Washington University in St. Louis, and co-director of the Center for Community Health Research and Partnership. Dr. Sanders-Thompson's funding research addresses racial identity, socialization, and experiences of discrimination and their implications for well-being, as well as promotion of colorectal cancer screenings and HPV vaccination among African Americans. Finally, we'll hear from Logan Singerman, the Director of Community Partnerships and Communications at the Southside Institution Neighborhood Alliance, or SINA. SINA is a partnership between the Connecticut Children's Medical Center, Hartford Hospital, and Trinity College that aims to improve the quality of life in the greater Frog Hollow neighborhood. Logan works with the residents to carry out community-led projects such as building community gardens, murals, and playgrounds on vacant lots. Logan also regularly knocks on doors to share information, builds relationships, and looks for opportunities to find mutually beneficial collaboration. So first, we're going to hear from Dr. Stephanie Chambers, share some of her experience working with community partners while balancing academic demands. And with that, I will hand it off to her.
Hello and welcome to my brief talk titled Balancing Professional Demands and Community Engagement. I am Stephanie Chambers. I'm a professor of political science at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. I'm also the department chair, and I'm very pleased to be here today to talk to you a little bit about my scholarship and to share some ideas that will hopefully help you thrive in your profession. So to begin, I thought I would tell you a little bit about myself, just so that you would understand where I'm coming from and what sort of expertise I have that qualifies me to share these ideas with you today. So as I noted, I'm a political scientist. I am somebody who employs mixed methods in my scholarship. Much of my research is interpretive, but I've also received extensive training in quantitative methods. So what I basically do is use qualitative and quantitative methodology in my scholarship. I do a lot of in-depth interviews and These are often done with communities of color, in communities of color. Because I study, for the most part, underrepresented or marginalized communities in urban America. So I'm a political scientist with a concentration in American politics, but I look at things like urban politics, racial and ethnic politics, education policy, environmental justice, and migration. For most of my years as a scholar, 20 plus years, my work has centered on the experiences of African-American and Latinx communities in cities like Chicago, Cleveland, Columbus, Ohio, Minneapolis, Hartford, New Orleans. But beginning in 2012, I started working with the Somali American community in the Midwest. Although certainly connected to my work, looking at underrepresented communities in urban America, this was the first time I was working with a community with roots in the refugee resettlement process and a community that is predominantly Muslim. As someone from a multiracial family with connections in the Black and Latinx communities, I'd always been very comfortable with the community work that I was doing. However, when I transitioned to looking at the Somali American community, it was really the first time where I was stepping outside of my comfort zone. And I felt like an outsider, which was a really good experience for me because it helps me better understand what other scholars face when they're looking at communities that are different from their own. And also it helps me in terms of the work I do at a liberal arts college when I send students out into the community. It gives me a better sense of what it is that they're dealing with when they're, doing community engaged scholarship. So my position as an outsider really brought a new understanding of the nuanced position I held as a researcher. And again, in the past, I had felt like I was doing research on communities or questions that were really relevant to my own life experience. And it took me longer to get my foot in the door with the Somali community. And I would be happy to talk to anybody if you reach out to me by email about the challenges I faced and how I was able to navigate a little bit. But I also had to be really reflective in the process of beginning this new project that resulted in my most recent book on Somali political, economic, and social incorporation. And I also found that a lot of the people that I was interviewing, the subjects in my research, my respondents, were really tired. They felt that they had a high level of research fatigue. A lot of scholars coming in and doing research, interviewing people, and of course, those who were giving of themselves, not getting much back in return. So I've always been very careful about the relationships that I build with those who, trust me. But I had to really think carefully about that with this new group that I was going to be working with. So that's a little bit about me, but let me give you some tips, especially for those who are new to some of this community engaged scholarship. Because I know it can be daunting if you're doing it for the first time. And there are a lot of concerns, particularly for newer scholars at institutions where maybe you don't have job security or you don't have tenure yet. So where to begin? First of all, you're doing the right thing by being in a training session like this. And I would emphasize that there are a lot of other types of training that you can pursue that can give you the skills that will help you in not only sort of beefing up your own research skills, but helping advocate for yourself as a scholar who is perhaps making a pivot in terms of the type of research that you're doing. So a couple of tips that I have are, if you're someone who is going to be doing more interpretive methods, so you're going to be doing interviews, let's say, or field research, you might want to take the time to get training in programs that can help you analyze interview data like Atlas TI or other new software that has emerged in recent times. Having really good data visualization skills will also help you when I talk about presentations later that will sort of tie into this, but making sure that you have the skills, the best skills, to be able to disseminate your results and communicate them in public settings to scholars and community members alike. I would also say that increasingly, a lot of my junior scholars that I'm encountering are registering their hypotheses before they begin research projects that they feel might be questioned by other scholars or in the tenure process or in the peer review process. There are a number of organizations where you can register hypotheses in advance of your field work or your project beginning. One is the Center for Open Science. There are a number of other organizations that can do that. It's not a foolproof solution. There are, if you research it, there are pros and cons, but I do happen to think that it's a nice way to protect yourself and to show the reliability of your results. Connecting with established scholars is really key when you're doing community engaged scholarship. You want to make sure that you can draw on existing research in your own publications to show that there's credibility in this way of doing research that you've just started working on. And people like me are really excited about mentoring and working with scholars who want to try something new. And I might not be in your field exactly, so looking for those people, trying to meet them at conferences or sending them an email, even if it's a cold email, to say, I really enjoyed your article or your book on this topic. I'm starting to do X or Y. This can be really helpful in the immediate research that you're doing in getting feedback, but it can also help you come up with a group of people who might be good reviewers for your scholarship, or reviewers when you get to the tenure and promotion process, or people who can help you find those reviewers for the tenure and promotion process. And then I would also say that you should look within your own institution for mentoring. So are there people who are doing this type of work within your department, but also within your broad, for me, social science division? And are those people who could maybe help you navigate your institution and expectations at your school? And also going across the institution. So for me, maybe connecting with people in the natural sciences on something that might deal with environmental justice could be a really good opportunity for me to also sort of broaden my the reach of my research, introduce me to new scholarship. I know for me, I really had to train myself in like the basics of Islam, for example, and it was my history colleagues who were the most helpful in some of that work as I was retooling. Now, some of you might have concerns as you start doing community engaged scholarship. One question will be, will the institution value this work? And I've sort of alluded to this already. I would definitely try to identify evidence of significant scholarship in this area. Now, you might be a path breaker where you're looking at something in your field that's brand new, but I would look for other types of scholarship that touch on similar issues. So even if you're the newest person, the first person to look at a research question, I would try to see if in your discipline there is a record of community engaged scholarship and articles or books that have been really well received, and that you can sort of file away to use when you're explaining the methodology that you're using in your articles or your publications or in your tenure and promotion materials. I have the word mentors here in bold, and I think I keep kind of tiptoeing around this issue, but mentors in your field are really important. These are the people who can help, they'll encourage you, they'll help validate your work, and they'll give you honest feedback. And I think that, some people struggle, they can't find somebody, their institution might be small, or they don't know a lot of people, it's a big place, but looking outside of your institution can also be helpful. And really finding scholarship and then reaching out to those scholars is key. Grant opportunities can also be a way for you to get a little bit of external validation about the research and scholarship that you're trying to produce. And it can also be something that backs you up when you're dealing with a department, an institution that you worry might not value your work. So grant opportunities can be another important avenue for scholars who are engaged in this type of opportunity. And I would contact your grants office at your institution, and I would tell them that you might have, perhaps you have a community partner that might open the door to other types of grants. Local foundations sometimes have opportunities for funding and so forth. Now, the academic calendar can often pose a threat for those of us who are doing community engaged scholarship. So we might have ideas about, okay, I need to get this done by May or by March because I have a 10-year reappointment file due, or it might be that I'm taking time off this summer, or I'm, whatever it is. The key thing that I guess I would say to you is that you want to communicate with your community partners or anybody that you're working with outside of an academic setting about your schedule. If there are limitations, if there are deadlines that you face, explain them. I know for me, when I schedule interviews, I'm sometimes trying to fit them in. I just completed 13 interviews recently that were done by Zoom, and I wanted to get them done before the semester started. And that's why I was, somewhat, I was flexible for the month of August, but once September hit, I knew I wouldn't have time to do this type of work and give it the attention I need. So be clear with whomever it is that you're working outside of academia, what your schedule is. There are also creative solutions. So there have been times in my career where I've been so overwhelmed by the work that I have to do, plus my teaching. And I've had situations where I've ended up creating a community learning project in my class, getting institutional review board approval, and having my students do work that can help with my scholarship. These can be great ways to maximize your time. So I would encourage you to think about that. Is there a way that the research question that you're asking could somehow, it could be something as simple as I know I need to read these 10 articles in the next couple of weeks. I'm actually going to assign them to my students, to my class, and I'm going to use those for my teaching so that I can get through those articles for my scholarship, but also convey important information to my students and have discussions. And this might spark new ideas, interests, etc. And then I would also say, if the academic calendar is, presenting a problem for you, deadlines can be really key. Most of you are so established that you know this already, but I often will put together a proposal for a conference that stems from my community engaged research. And I will know, for example, in May, I have a conference presentation and I have to get the field work done or the data analyzed in time for that presentation or that event that's coming up. It's also really important, I think, for us to advocate for community engaged scholarship. If you're in a department where this is not the norm, or at an institution where it's not the norm, talk to your department chair or your senior mentors within your department so that they understand the importance of your research and why the methodology that you're using is going to really help with your scholarly productivity. I really think we have to emphasize the rigor of community engaged scholarship, and it helps build a narrative so that others understand what we're doing. So not only do you have to go through, institutional review board approval for when you deal with human subjects, that's really important. You could also talk about, hypotheses, registration. You can talk about publications that you're trying to, have within a certain period of time, that a certain journal is, publishes a lot of research that's community engaged scholarship. You can also talk about your grant record if you're able to secure some grants to boost the perception that you are truly engaged in important scholarship. And then I also really think that sharing our findings is key. So, a lot of what we do as community engaged scholars is try to find real world solutions to problems, or at least shed some light on them so that we can better understand them. But giving public talks and presentations can be really important. It disseminates our results, it grounds our work theoretically. And I also think that it's important that when we're doing these types of public talks, that we aim them toward a broad audience. So I always try to ground my work in existing scholarship or theories, and I try to make sure that I don't use jargon from political science, so that if I have community partners who are attending events, when I'm doing talks, I can sort of aim it at an audience of individuals from a diverse, academic, educational background. Sometimes I envision delivering a talk to my undergraduate students, and that helps me avoid the jargon that political scientists can sometimes fall into. And then I would also say that most of our institutions have teaching centers, and use those. Try to get the people who are directing those centers to consider having workshops about community engaged scholarship. It can help promote that sort of work within the institution. It can help create a supportive atmosphere for people who are doing that sort of work. It can help you find mentors. So it's not just liberal arts colleges like Trinity College, where I work, that has these teaching centers. I recently just did a workshop, and the University of Minnesota has an excellent center, and they have some wonderful resources. So, large institutions also have those resources. And finally, I just want to thank you for listening today, and give you my email address. You can easily find me. If you send me an email, I would be happy to talk to you, schedule a Zoom or anything else to support you and your scholarship moving forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chambers. And next, we're going to hear practical steps to begin community engaged research from Dr. Vetta Sanders Thompson.
Good afternoon. I'm going to spend time talking to you about practical steps to community engaged research. One of the first questions you might ask is, when should you reach out to an organization or person when developing your research idea? Whether you should do it with the idea, when you're designing the research proposal, or after it's funded. Once you have a sense of your interest in a community, an issue, or a problem that may be of relevance to that community, and you believe that a potential partner might be willing and able to work with you, you should begin to reach out. This means that you've done the background work and have reason to believe that this work is a part of their mission or their current work. At this point, you work with them to develop the idea. However, it is not unheard of to take a project to a community once you have sketched out the basic design and work with them on the final aspects. There is more community ownership and commitment to a project that they have helped create than a project that they are working in or on. After a project is funded, it makes it kind of easy for the partners to feel that they are in some way being used. So you need to think about what your goal is for a long-term relationship. In my own work, I find that it is important to reach out to partners to help me develop an idea. When I reach out to them to help me develop an idea, I let them know that this may or may not be funded, but I want to work with them in various ways, and we will keep going until we have this particular project put together. The next question that comes up is, what does the first contact look like, especially if you don't already have a relationship with the person or the organization? Again, what this looks like depends on how you position yourself in the community. Do you know people, past partners, who can provide an introduction? Are you a member of a church, a civic organization, or community-based organization? Can your contacts there facilitate an introduction? In my first effort in working with the community on a project, people that I knew in this community served as intermediaries for me. They used their contacts and made introductions to the organizations that I needed to work with. Over time, because of the way I positioned myself in the community, people were familiar with me because when asked, I volunteered, did presentations, assisted them with programming, reaching out to other faculty members. And so there was a relationship built and trust. And I could approach them even though we had not worked together prior to that point. Who sends the introduction and invitation matters. The more personal, the better. If the individuals that you want to work with don't know you, you probably want to start by setting up an individual, personal get to know you meeting. In my own work, I usually invite people to breakfast or lunch at my expense. We spend time getting to know each other. They gather information on who I am, how I work, my ideas. I gather information on their thoughts and ideas, and we do this to see what's the potential for the relationship without any requests or obligations. Once I've completed this process of individual interactions and meetings, I'm ready to think about what's that small group of core partners that I need to bring together in order to further develop the idea and the research portion of this project. And I make those selections with a view toward longer term relationships, people, groups that I might want to continue to work with. And once I've made that decision, I start to issue, invitations and to work with that small core group about the time, the place, and how many of potential partners come together to work on specific aspects. I usually, again, try to meet in neutral spaces so that they aren't feeling overwhelmed or as if I have all the power because we're meeting in my space. And, universities can be intimidating spaces sometimes. The next issue that comes up are, building trust. You can get people to agree to work with you. That doesn't necessarily mean that they are trusting of the relationship. And so what do you do to build that or to avoid problems or mistrust early on? Trust is about relationships, and in any relationship, respect is key. Honesty, transparency, and responsiveness. Really make it clear you value who your partners are, and you make that clear through what you do, how you treat them, how you treat their ideas. The transparency part is letting them know from the beginning what is going on around budgets, timeline, any changes in strategies. They should know as soon as you know, and definitely before people who are not partners know anything about any shifts, changes, or any major announcements about the work. Make sure that you are clear to them that you are working from an asset or strength-based framework. It is difficult for communities when they always feel as if researchers are coming from a deficit perspective. What's wrong with them? They know their assets and their strengths, and often they want to build from those rather than consistently be perceived as those in need that others are coming to save. Let them know that you value what they know and you value those they work with and those they serve. Importantly, keep your word. Do what you say you're going to do. Be honest and upfront about what you can and cannot do with funds. I have often had a conversation with partners because they have worked with some other researchers, and rather than telling them that a funder didn't allow a certain use, they would go into their own personal funds, fund things, but that's not what they said to the partner. And so when they started to work with me, and I was like, we can't use these funds for food. But it turned out we really needed to provide a meal for a particular activity within the community. And I had to be clear, our budget may be constrained because we've got to find alternative sources to fund this. And they were surprised, but they were willing to do that and to work on a budget that was doable. But it was because I was honest. Here are the funders' requirements. Here's what we can spend money on, here's what we can't. So just be willing to tell the truth about what is going on. Be willing to invest in your partners. Working with you means they provided their time, talent, and resources, and you should be willing to do the same. Again, it's giving talks, attending events. When you can't, being upfront about that, but sometimes assisting and helping them to identify people who can. You will be surprised at how little it takes to really build trust in that relationship. The other question is, what types of documents do you develop together to ensure there's equitable agency between both parties? And here, I think that work you do in co-planning becomes important. All the things that you've worked through during that co-planning process appear in a memorandum of understanding or a partnership agreement. The documents should be clear and detailed. They should lay out the activities, the timeline, the resources needed, and who is doing what that exists in that logic model that you've created with that team as a part of developing your research strategy. But you have to be clear that that document, those documents, whichever one you choose to develop, has to be flexible and meet the shifts and changes that occur in community-based research so that it's responsive to conditions and changing contexts. Sometimes the member of an organization who was your primary contact and your primary champion shifts. Well, do you continue to work with that organization? Then you need to update the plan for how that organization participates based on who the new staff person is and what their particular skill set and passion is, so that the work matches who you are actually working with. I've had to do this, and sometimes, you know, it comes within the period of time that you plan to review and revisit and revise. Sometimes it comes in between, but you have to be ready to make those adjustments and make those updates in partner contacts and roles. Sometimes it means that there's a shift in what each organization is doing, and that document should reflect that, and the other organizations should agree to those changes. You want to ensure that the document results in some common understanding about the purpose of the partnership, the form it takes, and it provides guidance to the implementation. It serves as your basis for assessing the success of that partnership and refining what you do. And finally, you know, how do you balance identifying and supporting your work with the organization's goals and data and needs with what the research output you need in order to go through the promotion and tenure process? In my own case, I had a strategy from the beginning of using the work that I did in the community and the process of building that work and what we saw as the benefits of that work as a source of publication. So one of the first projects I did was working with a youth organization to allow the youth to develop a project that promoted their academic and economic and entrepreneurial spirit. And I wrote a paper about that whole process of involving the youth, working with community leaders and an agency that served those youth, and what we saw as the benefits of doing that work. Similarly, when in understanding the community and its history and its culture and how that affected the utilization of mental health services, I wrote about that process, and I wrote about their stance in those issues. And so it's not just writing about that particular study, it's writing about what you learn as you do this work that you believe will benefit other scholars who are interested in similar work. But the other piece is helping the community to understand what it takes for you to stay and what it takes for you to get promotion and tenure. And if they are committed to the work that you are doing and you have built trust, you will be surprised at how much they will work to assist you and getting what you need to get done so that you are able to survive and remain at your at your university and at your organization. It's a give and take, and it's doable. And the final thing to remember is increasingly universities are shifting their perspective on community-based research and community engagement. And many are looking at their promotion and tenure policies to make them more accommodating to this work. And so you should have a conversation with the leadership at your institution to determine what your latitude is in this respect. And check in around the plan that you hope to use to get that work done so that you can meet the guidelines and continue to do this important work in the community. So good luck. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sanders Thompson. And finally, we're going to hear from Logan Singerman on ways to address common mistakes that might pop up during the community engaged research process.
Hello, my name is Logan Singerman and I work at SINA, and I'm here today to talk to you about engaging community partners in community research. I'm going to be talking about the perspectives you should take into the research during your pre-engagement, as well as common mistakes and solution to those mistakes to keep in mind when you're actually doing the research. As I mentioned, I work for SINA, which stands for the Southside Institutions Neighborhood Alliance, which is actually a partnership between Trinity College, Hartford Hospital, and Connecticut Children's to improve the quality of life in the neighborhood. And I was asked to share with you today because in March of this year, I was involved with Trinity College in carrying out a research project to gauge how community members felt about the COVID vaccine. And so today I hope to bring you both the perspective of a community partner who's worked with a research institution, as well as what I've heard from community members about research in general. So first, pre-engagement. The reason why I want to start here is because while research is scientific, working with a community partner is not a science. It's an art. It's not like baking cookies. I can't just give you 10 steps and it will work every time. But I'm starting here because these are attitudes. It's a posture. It's perspectives that you need to keep in mind, because if you don't, it will jeopardize the success of whatever you do. So that's where we're starting. Before you get started, keep these things in mind. Here are 3 perspectives you should know. 1 is that there is a history that pre-exists you. It's nothing personal. When you walk into a room, and if a community member feels uncomfortable, if they don't trust you, it doesn't have to do with you. It has to do with the complicated history of the institution you represent. The worst thing you can do is ignore this and be mad about it. The best thing you can do is acknowledge it, be sensitive to it, and to build trust by the way that you interact with community partners and with community members. And just to tell you a story about what I've heard from some community members of how they feel about research, I was talking to a woman in Hartford, and there was a flyer put out by UConn. They were trying to learn about food insecurity, had put a bunch of stats about food insecurity, and they wanted people's perspectives. They could come to this group and get a gift card. And I thought, oh, great, they're giving out a gift card. What the community member shared was there was this feeling of, what does UConn need to know? Like, don't they already know about the issue that already exists? And there was this feeling that the gift card was a carrot that was sort of trying to get them to be like a guinea pig for their research project. So know that there's a history of extraction, and that there can be a feeling that these studies have come and gone and nothing has happened. And there's no feedback of what has occurred. And so, yeah, I shared the last time I got a gift card, but what was the point? So yeah, your gift card is nice, but what I want to see is my community get better. So keep that in mind. Perspective 2 is there's a power imbalance. Where this is played out for me is we, in the community, we're building a community garden, and we were building a leadership team to figure out things about the garden, and we're having meetings. And what I found is that the residents who all lived within a couple of blocks of the garden, they kept looking to me to make decisions, when I am the worst person to ask about what should be done for a community garden, because I'm not a good gardener. And so there was this deference that happened because of the power imbalance of the conditioning that's happened between sort of a professionalized institution and I don't know, non-professionals. And so just know that there's a power imbalance. So be very mindful of not steamrolling anybody and making sure that you aren't contributing to a complicated history that your institution has most likely been a part of. Perspective 3 is people want to be heard. So this kind of balances out the first perspective that says, hey, it's going to be hard, it's an uphill battle. And on the other hand, know that it's possible that you're doing a good thing, you're asking a good question, and you're trying to find out information from someone that ultimately can help guide interventions or get resources that will help the community and lead to human flourishing. That's a beautiful thing. And it's really overcoming that history where someone really feels heard. And that's where during our research, we found that the flyers, I mean, we put out so many flyers and it did not really return much of anything. But what worked the best is a person that went to Connecticut Children's who had relationships with some people at Catholic Charities. They had some family groups that were already meeting and they had focus groups. And we got a lot of insights through those focus groups because people felt heard. It was a space where they could share, where there could be dialogue back and forth, where we could explain what was going on, and people were heard. So you're doing a good thing, and it's just finding that balance of how to make sure that you address the history and that people are actually heard. So now, getting to actually doing the research of common mistakes and possible solutions. The first is jumping to your research question without talking with your partners. So you need to use the same approach that we use when building a community garden. We know that there are people who have built a garden on a vacant lot without talking to anyone, and then no one comes. The garden gets overgrown, it ends up more blighted and worse than before. So we don't use the mantra, if we build it, they will come. We use the mantra, if we build it, you will continue to come and bring others with you next time. And you need to do the same. And so you need to co-create the research question with your partners. As I mentioned, you're doing important work. And your partners probably have questions that they want answered because they want the people that they are serving with for them to have better health outcomes. And so there has to be some question that serves both of you well. And the reason why that's important is, one, it helps to build buy-in, enthusiasm when this question is something they're passionate about. And two, since it's tied to their work within the community, it helps you to tell that story and for them to tell the story to community members to overcome some of the distrust and the complicated history that exists, to say why this research matters and what you're hoping to accomplish. So don't jeopardize your research before it begins by not talking with your partner. Two, treat a community partner as a third wheel or losing them in your lingo. In the project I was involved with, I think Trinity actually did an incredible job of making sure that I was a decision maker and we had regular communication. I'll give you an example. We were using Qualtrics. I'd never used it before. I was having issues logging in. It was some tech issue. They checked in. I said what was going on. They connected me with IT. They fixed it, and we moved on. And I think that highlights a couple of things. One is you need to check in. Like, don't assume that this person has a PhD because they don't. And at the other hand, they didn't make me feel stupid. It didn't seem like they were patronizing me, but they were treating me as an equal partner and making sure that I was, learning something I'd never used before. And ultimately, that was, both of us left this partnership feeling good about the work we did because that mutual respect was created. So, mistake 3, building false expectations and not communicating clearly. I'll give you an example. In Hartford, there's a factory that had been run down for a decade. A community development corporation came to renovate it. They went to the community asking them, what do you want to see? Anything, let us know. What do you want to see? The community, they, overcoming the history, they said, okay, we'll give you a shot. We'll give you a chance. And they shared, they wanted a laundromat. They wanted, I don't know, I think it's a basketball court, things like that. And then the partner comes back to the community and says, we're sorry, but we can't do your top picks because our funding is tied to health and employment. And the community was really mad. The trust was broken and they never recovered. All they needed to do was be transparent from the beginning. If you're constrained by funding, just tell people that and ask them that at the beginning. People aren't going to be mad. They'll understand. Just tell them before. Otherwise, you start to sound like someone who's changing your story, someone who's lying, which isn't good to do to a group of people that don't trust you to begin with. And so be transparent and co-create desired outcomes with your community partner. And then also, transparency, that's very important as you go about your research. And our final mistake to go over is that intentions aren't enough. Partners sometimes need support. I'll give you an example. So when we were doing our research, our idea was the agency I worked for, the people we know, that wasn't going to be enough. We needed to connect with the connectors of other organizations. So we pulled together this community connections convening where about 25 to 30 partners who all work with children and family in Hartford got together. And combined, we probably reached about 10 to 15,000 people in Hartford. And so we talked about, hey, how can we get this flyer out? We have a QR code. We want to know how people feel about the vaccine. People were on board about it. On the Zoom call, we sent out the flyers with a follow-up email. And then pretty much, no one except for one other partner actually gave out the flyers. And nothing really came of it. So we were debriefing in another Zoom call, and we were asking people, hey, so how do you think it went? What could have gone better? And someone said, you really should have given us the flyers so we could have given them out to the people we know. And I was thinking, well, that's exactly what we agreed to on the Zoom call, and that's exactly what the email said. Now, this person who said this, they oversee 15 schools in the region that serve thousands of kids, and they're not a person who's incompetent. They're just a person who's busy, who was in charge of overseeing 15 schools and thousands of kids in the midst of a pandemic. So I think what would have better served us as we went about asking people to be involved is to ask them about, honestly, what the demands on their schedule were and what capacity issues they might have. Even if you want to do this, like what could help you to be able to carry this out? Are there other resources that might help to get these flyers into the hands of some students? And so I think it's important to ask those questions so you can co-create the project budget and design the project in such a way that your community partner can reach the community members that they know. Because chances are, if they're a community partner doing important work in the community, that's filling their time. And if it comes between this side project and someone getting evicted, or a report that their funder is requiring, otherwise their funding might be in jeopardy, you're going to lose every time. And so you just need to ask that question. And the good thing about that question is it's both strategic, it helps carry out the work, but it also communicates that respect that you're trying to communicate to overcome that complicated history. Thank you so much for your time, and I wish you the best of luck in all your research projects to help better your communities.
Thank you, Logan. Now that we've given an overview of the planning stage and shared some personal experience from scholars and practitioners who've conducted community engaged research, let's look at some next steps you can take as your project moves into the implementation stage. So we've identified our community of interest, partnered with relevant organizations, co-created the research question, and established an agreement with our partners. The next 4 steps revolve around recruiting participants for our research, collecting data with our partners, analyzing data with our partners, and disseminating findings. We mentioned earlier that your partner can be the bridge to determine which members would like to participate. The organization, again, can directly communicate your wishes and plans with their members and internally decide who would be the best fit for the project, and ensure that a diverse representation of perspectives and thoughts are included. From there, we move to the data collection phase. While this stage might seem quite similar to a traditional research model, there are a few differences to consider. It would be helpful to review and test all proposed data collection instruments and techniques with community input before the actual use. As with any group of people, there might be some certain issues that arise with the instruments and techniques you plan to use. So running this through the community first would be helpful to alleviate any of those concerns. So some examples could include capturing accurate and comprehensive social demographic information to appropriately categorize community members for analysis, or seeking assistance from experts to best frame questions that deal with immigration status. After data is collected, we enter the analysis phase. Ideally, Your partner will help review collected data throughout the research project, but especially during this phase before publication. One of the invaluable aspects that community partners bring here is their lived experience. Through it, they can determine important, timely, and most critical, impactful interpretations of the collected data. Their experience can illuminate understandings of the data that might be overlooked from an outside perspective. And finally, community partners can help ensure that the analyzed data will be beneficial and not detrimental to their lives. For full context, we do not mean changing outcomes to be better, but to present and frame the information in a way that can leverage the community as assets to improve well-being. This is a critical step to break the previous cycles of community exploitation and mistrust. One way to execute this might be co-hosting community forums where you share your initial interpretations of the data and seek feedback and clarification from community members. That way, you're ensuring transparency with participants and giving members agency and decision-making abilities of where the data goes next. And finally, the last component of our community engaged research project is disseminating your findings. As something that would have been established in the research agreement, be sure to clearly note what end products are expected to be produced from the research and how it will be shared with all partners. This is also an opportunity to consider co-authorship for academic publications. You can share guidelines for authorship with your partners at the get-go, and they can determine if they meet the necessary criteria. If your partner is unfamiliar with this process, you might need to provide some of your academic knowledge here. You also want to ensure that your partners have the opportunity to be recognized and given credit for their contributions. In terms of disseminating your findings, there are multiple avenues to achieve this, but just like everything else mentioned before, work with your partner to ensure that the forums and products you produce to share will be both impactful to community members and tailored to match with your target audiences to maximize relevance and engagement. For academic examples, they might include publishing results in a peer-reviewed journal or presenting at an academic conference. For those presentations, consider having your partner be a co-facilitator. This helps improve the effectiveness of knowledge transfer to attendees, provides access to information that might normally be inaccessible to the community members, and creates capacity building opportunities for your partners. For policy and media examples, they could include policy briefs, one-pagers, memos, media interviews, and op-eds. Community members might want to see direct change through policy, and having an evidence-based material and results to back up your claims will be an effective way to communicate your desires with policymakers. You might also consider sharing with broad audiences through an op-ed or an interview with a local reporter. And this is the part where SSN can really offer our services and guidance. We work with our scholars to translate research findings into actionable policy or media material and determine pertinent policy stakeholders to engage with. So again, if this is of any interest to you and your work, we at SSN can definitely help. And finally, community examples can include hosting feedback meetings with members, producing a website that is accessible and gives timely updates, creating community reports or fact sheets, or just sharing the results through digital media. For dissemination here, it's really important to recognize that the goal is to present key findings that directly impact members in an accessible manner. I listed multiple examples because some members might prefer in-person events, some might want to look online or on social media, and some might want to just have a quick fact sheet. Work with your partner to ensure that accessible knowledge translation occurs through the language used, the forum of dissemination, and the opportunities for feedback. We mentioned throughout this webinar how important it is for community engaged research to have impact for the folks you partner with and for it to result in action. It's definitely not lost on us that some of these actions might take time and outlive the life of the project itself. And we hope some of the advice that we've heard today from some of our practitioners and scholars have helped inspire some ideas to manage and balance that engagement with your own professional demands. So we're at the end of our webinar, and I really would like to thank you for viewing and watching today. We hope the shared material, the experiences, and lessons learned can help provide you with some of the tools to start developing or refining your community engaged research project. I do want to share a few resources that are on the screen and will be in the description in this video that provides more context to today's presentation and includes some worksheets and instructions to help navigate community engaged research. If you have any questions on today's webinar or would like to reach out for public engagement support, please feel free to reach out to me. I have my email address on the screen right now. Thank you so much, and we can't wait to see what your community engaged research project looks like.